London, with the poet John Gower playing the role of detective to disrupt a plot against the king. Holsinger followed that up with The Invention of Fire in 2015, another political thriller set in the age of Chaucer that features the introduction of the handgun into English culture. In 2019, Holsinger published The Gifted School, a satire of contemporary helicopter parenting set in Crystal, Colorado, a fictional version of Boulder, where Holsinger lived for a decade. His fourth novel, The Displacements, will be published this summer. Professor Holsinger is meeting with English classes today and tomorrow. This evening at 5:30, he will give a public reading in DPS. That program will begin with readers from the winners of NBA's Roscoe Bond Davis Poetry Contest. And now, please help me welcome Bruce Holsinger.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for having me here. Luckily, my backpack is safely inside, so I don't have to worry about that. When I was asked to come visit this week, I asked what the expectations were for these remarks. I was told I might talk about how I balance the different parts of my writing and professional lives, maybe tell a little bit about my story, highlight the lessons I've learned along the way. Since I'm visiting you in my capacity as a novelist, I thought I should probably share lessons I've learned specifically about writing. And the first slide, maybe I could share this quote from George Orwell, who wrote, "Writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a long bout of some painful illness. One would never undertake such a thing if one were not driven on by some demon whom one can neither resist nor understand." Or this one, from William Carlos Williams, who said that all writing is a disease. You can't stop it. And who could forget Charles Bukowski's great poem, "So You Want to Be a Writer." If it doesn't come bursting out of you in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes unasked out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. Unless it comes out of your soul like a rocket, unless being still would drive you to madness, don't do it. Unless the sun inside you is burning your gut, don't do it. When it is truly time, and if you have been chosen, it will do it by itself, and it will keep on doing it until you die or it dies in you. There is no other way, and there never was. Now, all of these guys are committed to the notion that art is suffering, that writing is pain and agony, that the production of prose or poetry has to entail some kind of misery or torment. But does writing really have to be this way? I worry about these notions of writing because I think a lot of people, especially young people, can get turned off of writing because they buy into this idea so often conveyed by established authors that writing has to mean sacrifice or impoverishment or discomfort. If you want to be a writer, you have to write every day without fail, and the only way to do that is to get your butt in the seat every day, no matter how much it hurts. Pardon the colorful prose, but as Dorothy Parker wrote, writing is the art of applying the ass to the seat. Another slide. Oh, actually, keep it right there. But your generation has suffered enough, I think. Maybe if you choose to be a writer, a full-time professional writer or a part-time tinkerer, everything in between, you'll instead find joy, pleasure, and excitement in the process rather than sickness, affliction, and tribulation. Yes, sometimes writing can be painful in various ways, but for the vast majority of people who consider themselves writers, past and present, writing is a mostly pleasurable and sometimes ecstatic hobby, and that's exactly as it should be. This was certainly how fiction writing started for me. I didn't publish my first novel until I was in my 40s, and that's not because I'd been trying to publish for 20 years and finally broke through. Growing up, what I really wanted to be was a musician, a clarinetist. Music was my passion, my drive. For college, I went to music school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and my only goal in life was to be a clarinetist in a major symphony orchestra. I thought I was all set, but then one morning it happened. Just before orchestra auditions my last semester, let's say I wasn't in great shape, and I blew the audition. I didn't even get into the second orchestra, didn't even make the top band. Standing there in the hallway looking at the audition results, I started to understand that I'd sabotaged myself on purpose, though without knowing it at the time. So I switched tracks and I applied to graduate school, ended up at the University of Minnesota, then I ended up at Columbia for graduate school. That's where I met my wife, and we moved together to Boulder, Colorado, where I started my first real job as an assistant professor of literature at the University of Colorado. During the next few years, my wife had a job at the University of Wisconsin. We were living 1,000 miles apart. I had some time on my hands, so I decided to switch tracks once more and try writing a novel. How hard could it be, I thought. The novel I wrote, if you could call it that, was a contemporary techno-thriller with a medieval background. One of the characters was a helicopter pilot named Chad. One of the sentences read, "The mashed potatoes were as fluffy as white clouds." It wasn't Toni Morrison, it wasn't Ernest Hemingway. Needless to say, I didn't find a publisher or even an agent. A few years later, I tried again. I wrote a novel about an English professor who discovers a lost manuscript. Couldn't publish that either. But I did find an agent, and she suggested that I write a book set in the period that I study and teach for a living, medieval England. Over the next few years, working on and off, next slide, I wrote a Burnable Book, which is a novel set in the streets of medieval London, involving the search for a book of prophecies about the assassination of English kings. I followed up a year later with this book, The Invention of Fire, a historical thriller about the earliest gunpowder weapons, and then my third novel, The Gifted School, a book about a group of parents trying to get their kids into an insanely competitive school for exceptionally gifted children, came out just a few years ago. So you can see I switched tracks yet again, from the medieval to the contemporary. By a stroke of luck, the book came out just as Operation Varsity Blues was breaking in the national news, and my novel got caught up in the whirlwind of coverage. The Wall Street Journal and Vanity Fair called it the book that predicted the college admissions scandal, and my book tour included a series of confrontations with readers, mostly parents, angry that I would poke fun at the contact sport of competitive parenting, in which I'm a longtime expert myself, believe me, and that's a whole other topic. My new novel, which comes out next summer, also takes on a contemporary issue, and you can have the next slide here, though a more serious one, climate change, telling the story of what happens to a family from Miami in the aftermath of the world's first Category 6 hurricane. Next slide. So I guess you could say that I take a hummingbird approach to my writing, flitting here and there, never staying in one area for long. And if there's one thing I've learned about myself as a novelist over the last 10 years, and it's something I've learned from a lot of other writers I've come to know, it's the danger of taking yourself too seriously. We all do that on some level. Now, by that I don't mean taking your writing too seriously, because anyone who wants to publish needs to take their writing with dead seriousness, care for it, nurture it as if it's someone you love. But part of taking your writing seriously is learning from your mistakes. You have to be able to take criticism. You have to have thick skin, and most of all, you have to be able to laugh at yourself sometimes and even be able to wince or cringe at your foibles and your follies. I know some writers who swear they never read reviews of their books, and if you come across one of those, you'll know they're a pathological liar. Most writers I know admit they read their reviews obsessively. I know I do, whether they're published in the New York Times or the Washington Post, or put up on Amazon.com by disgruntled anonymous reader. For example, these one-star reviews, a few of my novels over the last 6 or 7 years. I'm deleting last names to protect anonymity. One of the worst things I've ever read, Chef Automatic writes on Amazon of my most recent novel. Dull and uninspired writing, just awful, Heather agrees. I couldn't get through this petty-ass drivel. Of The Invention of Fire, Mandy writes, I'm out. It's literally putting me to sleep. And in my first novel, A Burnable Book, Bill has this to say, a convoluted mess. The book started out fairly ambitious, but fell flat almost all the way through. The hero was impossible to cheer for, and the setting and plot seemed contrived at best. It wasn't all bad. It did end after a while. Yeah, thanks, Bill. Now, you never know why someone might hate your book. Next slide. Sharon is a teacher at a school very much like Montgomery Bell, who thought The Gifted School hit a little too close to home. This book brings the competitive world of parents of gifted children, or children whose parents believe they're gifted, to life. And I found that world snarky and nasty and nothing I really wanted to read about. She's a teacher in a private school, so it hit a little too close to home for her. She was a head of school. Other readers who don't like my novels find them too vulgar. Next slide. And I'll admit, content warnings, some of them do contain a fair amount of obscenity. Also vulgar, Leah says. And for Steph, too bad that such a thought-provoking topic had to be laced with so much profanity. That's why I gave it 1 star instead of 5. I will not read this author again. Another thing you have to remember, if people actually start buying your books, is that they're commercial products, like anything else. They can be damaged, misrepresented on websites, and disappointing once they come out of the box. Next slide. Way too expensive for an ebook. 1 star. I ordered a new book, and this arrived dirty and used. And I feel bad, next slide, for a certain E. Early, who gave The Gifted School a mere 2 stars because he found it disappointing, a soap opera. Next slide. But at least he liked it better than the Nito XV21 pet and allergy automatic vacuum cleaner, which he gave 1 star because it kept lodging itself under his kitchen cabinets and TV stand. My favorite kind of 1-star review, though, is the rant. To rant is to speak or declaim extravagantly, to talk in a vehement way, usually about something you despise. I talked to one of the classes this morning about rants. Next slide. Let's look at a few rants about my novels. Here's Yelena reviewing The Gifted School. 480 pages of such garbage. It really wasn't a book about parents trying to get their kids into a school. It wasn't a book about friendships or relationships. It was a book, and really it should never have been a book, about the author's hatred for every single one of his characters. I think he needs therapy to deal with whatever guilt or jealousy or whatever else he was feeling when writing this book, because in all my years of reading thousands of books, I've never seen an author despise his characters so much. Next slide. Casey, on the other hand, is a good reader with a decent vocabulary, but A Burnable Book was one big show-off piece by the historian author. So boring. The story was contrived, twisted, and tied in knots beyond stomaching, with a red herring thrown in your face at every other page. And finally, last slide, listen to what Rachel has to say about The Gifted School. I truly hated this book, upside down, smiley faced. First of all, the characters are absolutely insufferable. The author highlights their flaws, and there are plenty of them, and fails to make any of them sympathetic, including the kids. Although, to be fair, their parents are awful, so what can they do? And while we're on the topic of characters, why TF are there so many? Most of them were completely unnecessary. There are already 8 or more main characters, and throughout the book, the author sprinkles in about 50 additional characters. We're talking first and last names, occupations. Why? How does that help the plot? This book needs a key to keep everyone straight. Honestly, I'm over this in general. I'm skipping. Moving on to the alternating POV, just know, honestly, I'm over this in general. Boring, lazy, unconvincing when it comes to switching up the styles and language level and so on. Okay, I'll stop. Now, you read enough of these rants about how much of a hack you are, and you risk ending up a puddled mess on the floor, unable to sit up straight, let alone sit down and write. But I also think it's important to understand what you might be doing wrong, and to learn from those who take the time to read your books, even if they end up hating them. I've been incredibly lucky in my short career as a novelist so far. I've met lots of wonderful writers. I felt spoiled beyond belief. But what every writer soon learns is that for every 10 people who love your novels, there are going to be at least 1 or 2 who absolutely hate them. Meaning that for every 10,000 people who love your novels, at least 1,000 or 2 will hate them. And of those, hundreds and hundreds will feel passionately enough about how much they hate your novels to post their opinions on Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes & Noble. And you know what? That's exactly as it should be, because in the end, if you're writing for your own delight and pleasure. If you're writing about something you feel passionately about, then that's its own kind of pain-free satisfaction. And if you're ever lucky enough to find readers for what you've written, even if they write scathing reviews, at least they bought it, or at least they brought it home from the library, or borrowed it from a friend, or learned about it in their book club, or read parts of it in a class, and at least they tried to read it, tried to give your words the gift of their attention, because that's really what it is, a gift. Anytime someone picks up something you wrote and reads it, takes it seriously, it's an absolutely powerful and irreplaceable gift. It's one reason why, the gift of being here this week, I'm so grateful to have the gift of your attention over the next few days. So wonderful to be here, and thank you all so much.